Great. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ritin, and I look after EY's AI and data business in Singapore. And my role is working with clients across industries, across the region in implementing AI. And I hope to share with you today some learnings, some conversations that have led to practical strategies of implementing AI as well. I think the conversation today is spot on when it comes to applying AI with a governance and risk mindset. But I will start by maybe level setting a little bit on AI and sustainability. Speak next about what's changed. AI is not new. We've had machine learning, we've had deep learning, as many speakers have spoken about in the past. But something's changed. Something changed November 2022 when ChatGPT was announced. And what has that meant from a sustainability perspective, but broadly from a application of AI to business value chains as well. And finally, I'd like to share some thoughts around what are some practical strategies to navigate AI? How do we make sure it gets implemented with the right characteristics of keeping humans in the center, making sure we're addressing some of the governance challenges around risk that Dr. Barker spoke about as well. So how should organizations think about leveraging AI as well? Let me start with a view on sustainability. And our view is that sustainability has long been thought of as a CSR exercise. We are successful, and so we contribute to society. And you flip that around, and the thinking for sustainability is we are successful because we contribute to society. And that leads to a very value-led perspective on sustainability. And as conversations since this morning would have shown, that sustainability is not just the CSOs, the Chief Sustainability Officers remit. It's across the board. It's across all kinds of stakeholders, whether that's your Chief Supply Chain Officer, it's your HR department, it's your IT department, it's your extended external stakeholders, your investors, your extended supply chain and the suppliers. Each of them have a role to play in contributing to this value. And the value from sustainability, if you accept the premise that it's a value-led conversation, it's not a cost-led conversation. Sustainability is not a cost. It's an investment that leads to value contribution. If we accept that premise, there are 4 pockets of value that we see typically coming from this lens of sustainability. The first is financial value, which is well understood in terms of financial returns for your investor and that community of stakeholders. There's customer value that you create by creating products which customers want to use. These are products which are sustainable in the product design itself, in the value chain or the product life cycle. There is a people value to it as well, that within your organization, do you have a diverse employee force? Are you creating learning opportunities, skill development opportunities? And there is a societal part of the value equation as well, is the impact that you have through elements like climate change and sustainable efforts that your business creates. There are few drivers to these 4 value pools. From a financial value perspective, you can have revenue growth, margin cost, the usual metrics that you use to measure financial value. From a customer perspective, it could be things like customer lifetime value, customer satisfaction. And these are all elements of social elements of the sustainability picture. From a people value perspective, there are many metrics and drivers that you could use as well. There's loyalty, there's learning, there's skill development as metrics that are typically used to assess the drivers for this part of the value equation. And from a societal value perspective, if you just take the supply chain element, if you go back into your supply chain from a supplier perspective, there are concerns around in different parts of the world, whether there's exploitation of labor that's happening, the kind of environmental footprint your product strategy has. So those are some of the metrics and some of the drivers that are typically used to measure the value that sustainability is able to drive for you. Now, across all of these elements, AI has a role to play, and AI has always had a role to play. AI, like I said earlier, has been around for a few decades at least. There used to be very descriptive kind of analytics where we used to take a set of data, create reports out of it. That was analysis as well. It graduated into machine learning, and we've had machine learning models, regression models, classification models, time series forecasting models. These have rich, decades of academic and commercial usage as well. And so all of these elements that you see of drivers have been impacted by AI. But like I said earlier, something changed, in 2022 when a new form of AI came up, which was generative AI or large language models. So let's see what that means and how is that now a catalyst, not just to sustainability, but I dare say to other functional parts of the organization as well. How has it supercharged some of the applications and some of the drivers that we've seen earlier? Let me speak about first giving you a sense of what are the macro trends in AI. We've kind of alluded to them, since this morning when we spoke about large language models. But even within the large language models, there's been changes. I don't know how many of you picked up the news on Thursday night. There's a new GPT in town, right? It's called O1, and it supposedly does a little bit more. It's got these capabilities of reflection as well, right? And what's changing along the LLM space is you would have noticed in 2022, there was a single modality that LLM came up with, which was a text modality. You give it a prompt in text, it gives you a response back in text. And that's shifted over the last 9 months, a year. You now have multiple modalities. You can give it text, it can generate an image for you. You give it text, it can generate a video for you. You give it text, it can generate audio for you. And you can mix up those modalities as well. So this capability of LLMs, which you could change the input and get a different output from a generative part is different. Right? This is not machine learning as we used to know it. In machine learning, you had an equation, and that equation was static most of the time. It was deterministic, is the right word probably to use, that given a set of inputs, the output would always be the same. Generative AI is different. In generative AI, given the same input, the output could be different. And it's more a probabilistic output, which is what creates a lot of the dissonance when it comes to governing this kind of AI, because you're not sure what a probabilistic system will throw up. And that's where a lot of the research has been. I caught the tail end of the panel discussion a little bit earlier, where there was a discussion on hallucination. And it's interesting that words like hallucination are part of normal conversations these days in board and corporate settings. But some of the advances in LLMs allow you to capture or control hallucination to a large extent. The latest version of GPT that I mentioned earlier has got a capability called reflection, in which the LLM, before giving you an answer, reflects on the answer, and you can force it to. So you ask it a question, and before giving you a response, you can constrain it to reflect on the answer. And that part of that constrained set of attributes could be, does it meet ethical guidelines? Does it meet sustainability guidelines? Is the answer you're going to give going to be hurtful, or is it going to be harmful for any segment of the population? So these are all safeguards that can be built into LLMs through properties such as chain of thought reasoning, rationalization. These are emergent capabilities. These are not capabilities that you can bank on at the moment. And so the governance aspects, the risk control aspects that we spoke about are still very much pertinent and very much needed. But it's an indicator of where this technology is going. It may not be there today. It may be there in 6 months, in a year, in 3 years, but just a sense of what the trending on that is looking like. So that's the part around large language models, modality, hallucination. The other element around large language models is the corollary of small language models. And these are models which are far more adaptable to use. They are single domain specific, and they work very well in applications where your inference time is important. That when you ask a question, you need an answer now, right? These are also very important when you have a specific domain in which you require an answer. So think about applications in the pharmaceutical sector or other sectors which are very narrow domains where the data that the LLMs have been trained on may not have been sufficient for it to have a certain proficiency. It also allows you to control hallucinations and make sure that the model is only answering in the domain it is most proficient in. So expect to see a lot of research and movement in there. Agentic architectures is another hot topic, and it adds to the governance and sustainability question as well. There are examples of agentic AI applications and startups being created where these are semi-autonomous pieces of logic. And one example that I saw recently, there was a startup. It's billed as the world's first AI software engineer, right? And you give it a problem of, create a website for a certain application, and it opens up its own window, starts doing the coding. Where it gets stuck, it'll consult documentation. Where it needs a bit of direction and push on what to do next, it'll come back to you and ask you, hey, I'm stuck, what should I do? And you give it an answer, and off it goes again. Now, if you just take a productivity and efficiency lens, that's massively helpful to organizations from purely the financial lens of sustainability. But if you look at it from other lenses of the people value, of the sustainability value, there are questions that remain to be answered in those spaces. But again, just a general sense of where the technology is going. Enough has been spoken about AI, risk, and governance, so I won't belabor the point. Perhaps I'll just make 2 or 3 comments. Risk in AI is not new. It's a topic that most IT organizations, it's a topic that most governance organizations have been very familiar with. The reason it's become a little bit more urgent as a discussion topic is because of the nature of LLMs that I spoke about earlier, which is the generative aspect, and perhaps the other element of generative AI being a bit of a black box. And a good way to think about it is when we had machine learning models, there was model explainability. When you ask a model, and I'm taking a trivial example, let's say to predict house prices in a particular area, the typical variables at a house price depends upon, you can easily intuit, its size of the house, proximity to the MRT, proximity to a school. And so if you gave it this information, you could get an answer. And given an answer, you could trace back as to how the model arrived at a certain prediction of the price. In LLMs, in neural networks, in deep learning neural networks, that explainability is not there. You'll get the answer and you'll get the right answer most of the time, but you will probably not be able to trace back as to how the answer came about. And as you can imagine, that has various ramifications, especially when you apply AI to decisions that have a consequential impact. Think about banks making credit decisions, loan decisions, which can have financial inclusion kind of impacts as well. So explainability of a model is a very important concept, and it's something that the field of AI, has been working with for quite some time. The use cases of AI, again, I won't speak too much to. I think Dr. Barker spoke about quite a number of them. But fundamentally, it's important to understand what's the new capability that generative AI is giving you that you didn't have before. When I spoke a little bit about this earlier, that through descriptive kind of analytics, you always have the capability to do basic trending of data to get some insights. Machine learning, or what we now call traditional AI, gave you additional incremental capability of predicting something or forecasting something or classifying something into certain areas, or even doing simulations, right? Given a set of data, what could the future look like, given interaction effect between different variables as well. Generative AI, as the name suggests, is a fundamentally different capability. You're generating something which didn't exist. And that, if you apply into the sustainability area across your business value chain, can have a lot of consequences. I'll take one example of supplier risk management, for example. And a lot of the risk that large supply chains carry is not having enough information of who their suppliers are, where are they based, what kind of labor practices do they employ, do events and news that occur, impact them from a regulatory perspective, and hence pass on the risk to the parent company as well. Now, you could use the text summarization capability of generative AI to gather up all the news and events as they happen in a particular geography of interest or for a particular company, and get to a determination of whether any event adversely impacts the supply chain, the supplier aspect of the supply chain itself. There are many other applications around climate change. Climate change is an area which is data hungry. It needs a lot of data to be able to make accurate models which can predict what patterns could be. A very emergent capability of generative AI models is to be able to generate synthetic data, which is realistic, which is able to correlate the different variables in a realistic way. And that capability gets used very extensively when you think about climate change modeling kind of use cases as well. Again, can't speak to all of those examples, but very wide application of generative AI in these cases. There are many risks, and again, Dr. Barker made excellent points around why these need to be governed. So governance of AI is a very real thing. There are many risks which are posed. I think Dr. Barker spoke about trust, accuracy, and trust and accuracy goes back to the conversation on the panel as well around hallucination. How do you trust that what generative AI is giving you is the right answer. And there are many examples where we've worked with clients, where we've developed applications where AI makes a recommendation or a decision, but the business intuition of the person is paramount. That answer may not be right, right? And so the fundamental principle with AI systems are these need to have a human in the loop, right? There is one school of thought, and I was having a conversation on the table I was sitting, which says that the prevailing paradigm of organizations have been people executing processes supported by data and technology. That could well shift into technology executing processes overseen by people, right? And it's a very fundamental change to how organizations are organized around people, skills, but also speaks to the central part that people have to play in overseeing decisions made by AI. I'll just focus on that one part. Perhaps the other part, which may not have been discussed as far as that generative AI itself comes with a lot of sustainability costs, right? These are trained on many, many large GPU clusters. GPUs are processors, which are very high powered processors. They're able to get through vast volumes of data quickly, relatively quickly, but they have a very large energy footprint as well. So every time that you're making an inference based on generative AI, there is a sustainability cost from a carbon footprint that you're paying as well. And that is a concern. It's a bit upstream of most organizations because most organizations who are consumers of generative AI can do little about it, but some of the bigger tech players like Microsoft, AWS, Google, etc., are making efforts to make sure that their data centers are more sustainable. The cooling systems, the water that they use, the energy that they use comes from renewable sources as well. But this is still a bit of an ongoing area of debate, whether the footprint of AI decisions, how do you circumvent the high sustainability cost of it? I think those are the two big ones. Dr. Barker, you spoke again. Thank you for doing a lot of my talking for me. You spoke a little bit about how regulation and law is emerging as well. There are no hard regulations except the EU Act and the hopefully soon Biden Act as well to come in. But there are guidelines, right? There are guidelines that IMDA in Singapore has published. There is the AI Verify Foundation that IMDA is spearheading, and that publishes a set of model guidelines. It publishes a set of benchmarks, and these benchmarks organizations can use to gauge whether the responses coming from generative AI fall within the acceptable range or not, right? A lot of times when you use generative AI, it's a subjective answer that you get back. So how do you really benchmark whether it is the right answer or not? That's where the AI Foundation, the Verify Foundation from IMDA, is trying to set up some benchmarks for organizations to use as well. Moving right along, I think, so if you take a step back, we've spoken a little bit about AI, sustainability rather. Then we spoke a little bit about, and very, very briefly, it's a very deep topic, can't do justice in 20 minutes to such a large topic, but what some of the trends are in terms of AI and generative AI. But perhaps it behooves us also to maybe think about how do you really, have successful AI initiatives. And in many organizations that you may have been part of, that you may have heard of, we start with a lot of POCs, right? These are proof of concepts, proof of value, and these are small, 6-week, let's try it out, let's test it out, but seemingly go nowhere. Scaling AI in a way that is repeatable, that is sustainable, is a challenge. And that's the last part that we should perhaps speak about a little bit. And from experience, successful AI projects really live in that center. It's the trifecta of having enough AI technology expertise to work with LLMs. And LLMs as a space is moving very, very fast. Every 6 months, every few weeks, you'll see a new LLM being launched. And there's a lot of commoditization, if you will, of LLMs happening as well. LLMs from a technology perspective are a very tiny sliver of what it takes to develop a successful application. You need a much larger AI platform. So having that mindset of how do I structure my AI projects in a platform way, which allows me to have some efficiencies, is an important skill consideration in an organization. The second part is about having the domain expertise, right? I mean, AI is all well and good, but unless you have the appropriate outlook for the domain that you're applying AI in, and it could be marketing, it could be supply chain, it could be customer experience, it could be finance, it could be HR. All of these areas are very ripe for AI usage. But the best work happens when the business and AI sit down together and think about how to apply AI. The last dimension is perhaps, from the conversation since this morning and the topic of this event as well, perhaps the most important is the layer of governance. And here the questions that typically come up is, what kind of an AI operating model should we have? And some of the questions that have been raised are, who should have ultimate authority over sanctioning an AI project, right? What does the value chain of AI governance look like? It's all very well to say that AI projects should be governed, but what does that mean in practical terms, right? What kind of risks, what kind of controls should you put in place? What kind of a risk scoring methodology should you have? And again, that's a very wide topic itself, but there are things that you can do from a data governance perspective to make sure that your data is clean. The data itself is not biased. The data itself is representative of the population that you're trying to make predictions for. So there are many different components of how you implement an AI operating system even. The other element is the impact on people. And this is another conversation that we were having a little bit earlier, that if all roles and all jobs are impacted to some degree, to varying degree by AI, what does that mean from a skill development perspective, right? And if you remember, I said a little bit earlier that another paradigm could be technology executing processes overseen by people. That means there has to be some degree of reskilling, some degree of better appreciation for how AI works. And when you put it into a business process, how do roles change? So apart from technology and business, the other two fundamental pillars of a successful AI program are around risk governance, people change management, and skilling as well. And those are the pathways that an organization typically looks at to implementing some of these projects, right? Right at the top, you'll see there's something called set the agenda. And in our experience, successful AI programs come from the top. They have to come board down. There is an alternative pathway which comes bottoms up, which is a path where you do multiple POCs and try and aggregate value, but that runs into trouble if you're unable to aggregate the value to secure investments from the board and satisfy the board that adequate safeguards have been put in place for the AI. So the best conversations are had right from the top. What is the board's vision of implementing AI in an organization and their value chain? The second element is establishing the foundation, and that speaks to the technology foundation, right? A lot of the AI to be used requires a tech foundation, requires a cloud foundation, and it requires a technology blueprint as well. I'll move through the others fairly quickly. There is the business function application of it as well. We spoke about the need for building the confidence in the AI and equipping and reskilling the people as well. And I'll finish by maybe painting a little bit of a journey as to how typically organizations go through adopting AI for sustainability or other business functions as well. You typically start with having a bit of a strategy and roadmap. Use case selection is paramount. Understanding where you are on the maturity journey from an AI perspective is paramount, because everything is contextual to where you are in your organization from a skills perspective, from a tech perspective as well. The often one lament that comes from boards and CXO groups that we work with is the value realization, right? I mean, the promise of AI, the hype cycle that Dr. Barker showed us is fantastic, right? Gen AI can do everything. But where is the tangible value? Remember the financial value lens of sustainability. How do you link back AI projects to those financial values? That benefits realization is super critical. I won't speak to all other elements of it. The middle part is the thrust of our discussion since this morning is responsible AI. And there are various tenets of ethical AI principles that various organizations have published. And there's a lot of regulatory guidance around that as well. But it's really, this piece goes beyond just the ethical articulation, just beyond saying that we believe in fairness, we believe in unbiased systems, we believe that systems should be resilient, we believe in trust, in accuracy of AI systems, right? How is the question that the second pillar is trying to answer? And this goes into the weeds a little bit in terms of understanding the model development life cycle. How do you go from data to training a model, to inferencing using the model? There are concepts around data observability, measurement, metrics, which are implicit in this middle path, which give you ongoing confidence that if an AI program was started with a certain objective, has it stayed true to the course, right? Has it lived up to the metrics that we expected it to live up to? The third part is around just scaling the AI across different organizations. And I'll finish the talk there. A very exciting space to be in. Moving very fast, does need adequate guardrails and governance from the board down. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ritin Mathur.